It's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. Happy to be back with you. I'm just going to read part of a chapter today because it's very long in our book, The Long Winter by Ingles For daily bread. In the third night of the storm, a stillness woke Amanzo. The blizzard had stopped. He reached out through the cold to his vest hanging in the chair, got out his watch and a match, and saw that the time was nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. In winter's dark, cold mornings, he missed his father routing him out of bed. Now he had to rout himself out of the warm blankets into the cold. He must light the lantern, stir up the fire, break the water in the ice pail himself. And he could choose between eating by making his own breakfast or going hungry. 3 o'clock in the morning was the only time that he was not glad that he was free and independent. Once out of bed and into his clothes, though he rather liked mornings better than any other part of the day. The air was fresher than any other time. Low in the eastern sky hung the morning star. The temperature was 10 degrees below zero. The wind blew steadily and the day promised to be fair. When he rode down Main Street on the hay sled, the sun had not yet risen, but the morning star had melted in an upward rush of light. The Ingles building stood solid black behind the endless eastern prairie covered with snow. Down 2nd Street, beyond it, the two stables with their haystacks looked small, and beyond them, Garland's little house had a speck of light in the kitchen. Cap Garland came riding up on his sled, driving his buckskin gelding. He waved to Amanzo, and Amanzo lifted his arm, stiff with the weight of woolen sleeves. Their faces were wrapped in mufflers, and there was no need to say anything. 3 days ago, before the last blizzard struck, they had made their plan. Amanzo drove on without stopping, and Cap Garland swung the buckskin into Main Street right behind him. At the end of the short street, Amanzo turned southwest across the neck of the big slough. At its narrowest place, the sun was rising. The sky was a thin, cold blue, and the earth to its far horizon was covered with snowdrifts, flushed pink and faintly shadowed with blue. The horse's breath made a white cloud above his head. The only sounds were the dumping or thumping of Prince's hooves on the hard snow and the rasp of the sled's runners. There was not a track on the waves of snow, not a print of a rabbit's paw or a bird's claw. There was no trace of the road, no sign of any living thing. Only the wind had furrowed tiny wavelets into the snow, each holding its own faint line in the blue shadow, and the wind was blowing a spray of snow from every smooth, hard crest. There was something mocking about the glitter of the trackless snow where every shadow moved a little, and the blown snow spray confused the eyes searching for any landmark. Amanzo judged directions and distance as well as he could, where everything was changed and uncertain, and he thought, well, we'll have to make it by guessing by golly. He guessed that he'd struck the neck of the buried big slough, which is like it's very swampy, somewhere near the place where he crossed to haul hay. If he was right, the snow underneath the sled would be packed hard, and in 5 minutes or less, they would be safe on the upland again. He glanced back. Cap had slowed the buckskin and was following at a cautious distance. With no warning, Prince went down. Whoa, steady, Amanzo shouted through his muffler, but he shouted calmly and smoothly. Only the horse's head, which was snorting, stuck up through the grassy air pocket in front of the sled. The sled ran on. Sliding forward, there's no way to put brakes on a sled, but it did stop in time. Almanzo jumped off the sled. He unhitched the whiffletree from the chain fastened to the sled's runners. Cap Garland drove around him and stopped. Almanzo went to Prince's head, and wallowing into the broken snow and tangly dead grass, he took hold of the reins under the bits. "Steady, Prince, old fellow, steady, steady," he said, because his floundering was frightening Prince all over again. Then he trampled down the snow until he could persuade Prince that it was firm enough to step on. Holding Prince by the bits, he urged him forward till with a mighty heave he broke up out of the hole, and Almanzo led him, rapidly climbing out of the hole to solid ground again. He led him on to Cap Garland's sled and handed the reins over to him. Cap's light eyes showed that he was cheerfully grinning under the muffler. "So that's the way you do it," he said. "Nothing much to it," Almanzo replied. "Fine day for a trip," Cap remarked. "Yep, fine large morning," Almanzo agreed. And then Almanzo went and got his sled, got it pulled around. He liked Cap Garland. Cap was light-hearted and merry, but he would fight his weight in wildcats. When Cap Garland had reason to lose his temper, his eyes narrowed and glittered with a look that no man could stand up to. Almanzo had seen him make the toughest railroader back down. Taking a coiled rope from his sled, Almanzo tied one end to the sled's chain. The other end he tied to Prince's whiffletree, and with Prince helping him pull, he guided the sled around the hole. Then he hitched up Prince to the sled, coiled the rope again, and drove on. Cap Garland fell in behind him once more. He was only a month younger than Almanzo. They were both 19. But because Almanzo had a homestead claim, Cap supposed that he was older than 21. Partly for that reason, Cap treated Almanzo with respect, and Almanzo had no objection to that. Leading the way, he drove toward the sun until he was sure they'd crossed the big slough. Then he headed southwest towards the Twin Lakes, Henry and Thompson. The only color now in the endless snowfields was the pale reflection of the blue sky. Everywhere, tiny glints sparkled sharply, and they stabbed at Almanzo's eyes, and he shut them till they were only a slot between his cap and muffler. The icy wool blew out and sucked back against his nose and mouth every time he breathed, so that thing had frozen solid and it would kind of hit him. His hands grew cold and too cold to feel the reins, so he shifted the reins from one hand to the other, beating the free hand against his chest to make the blood flow, to warm it up. When his feet got numb, he stepped off the sled and ran beside it, his heart pumping fast, forced warmth to his feet until they tingled and itched and then burned. And then he jumped back up on the sled again. "Nothing like exercise to warm you up," he shouted to Cap. "Let me in by the stove," Cap shouted back, and he jumped off his sled and ran beside it. So they went on, running, jumping, thumping their chests, then running again while the horses briskly trotted. "Say, how long do you think we can keep this up?" Cap shouted once jokingly. "Till we find wheat or hell freezes," Almanzo shouted. Now, they believed in a burning hell that was burning right now, and fire doesn't burn too well, or doesn't freeze too well. My clock. "You can skate on it now," Cap shouted back. They went on. The rising sun poured down the sunshine. It seemed colder than the wind. There was no cloud in the sky, but the cold steady grew more intense. Prince went down again in some unknown little slough. Cap drove by and stopped, and Almanzo did the same thing till he could get him out of the hole again. See the lone cottonwood anywhere ahead? He asked Cap. Nope, but I can't depend on my eyes, Cap answered. The sun glare had made him see black spots everywhere. They rewound their mufflers around their face, shifting their ice patches from the raw faces now. To the far horizon, all around them, there was nothing but glittering snow and the cruel wind blowing. Lucky so far, Almanzo said. Gone down only twice. He stepped into the sled and started and heard Cap shout, swinging in to follow. The buckskin had gone down. Cap dug him out, hauled the sled around, and hitched up again. Nothing like exercise to keep a fellow warm, he reminded Almanzo. From the top of the next swell, they saw the lone cottonwood, bare and gaunt. Snow covered the twin lakes and the low bushes that grew between them. Only the lonely tree's bare top rose above the endless whiteness. As soon as he saw it, Almanzo turned westward quickly to keep well away from the sloughs around the lakes. On the upland grass, the snow was solid. The lone tree was the last landmark. It was soon lost again in the trackless waves of snow. There was no road, no track, no trace of any kind of anything anywhere. No one knew where the settler lived who had raised the wheat. No one was even sure that he was still in the country. It might be that he'd gone out for the winter. It might be that there'd never been such a man. There was only a rumor that someone had told somebody that a man living somewhere out in that region had raised wheat. One wave of endless snow was like another. Beneath the snow spray blown on their crest, the low prairie swells seemed to come on forever, all the same. The sun slowly rose higher, and the cold increased. There was no sound but the horses' hooves and the rasp of the sleigh runners that made no tracks on the hard, icy snow, and the rushing sound of the wind that faintly whistled against the sled. From time to time, Almanzo looked back and Cap shook his head. Neither of them saw any wisp of smoke against the cold sky. The small, cold sun seemed to hang motionless, but it was climbing. That means the day was getting later. The shadows narrowed, the waves of snow and the prairie's curves seemed to flatten. The white wilderness leveled out, bleak and empty. How far are we going? Cap shouted. Till we find wheat, Almanzo called back. But he, too, was wondering whether there was any wheat at all in this endless emptiness. The sun was in the zenith now. Half the day was gone. It means it was straight up. There was still no threat in the northwestern sky, but it would not be unusual to have it would be unusual to have more than this one clear day between blizzards. Almanzo knew they should turn back now towards town. Cold and numb, he stumbled off the sled and ran beside it. He did not want to go back to the hungry town and say that they'd turned back empty-handed. How far do you figure we've come? Cap asked. About 20 miles, Almanzo guessed. Think we better go back? Never give up till you're licked, Cap said cheerfully. They looked around. There was an upland. If the lower air had not been a little hazy with the glitter of blowing snow, they could have seen perhaps 20 miles. But the prairie swells that seemed level under the high sky hid the town in the northwest. The northwest sky was still clear, though. Stamping their feet and beating their arms on the chest, they searched the white land from west to east, as far south as they could see. There was not a wisp of smoke anywhere. Which way will we go? Cap asked. Any way's good as the other, Almanzo said. They rewound their mufflers again. Their breath had filled the mufflers with ice. They could hardly find a spot of wool to relieve the pain of ice on the skin that had shafted raw. How are your feet? He asked Cap. They don't say, Cap replied. They'll be all right, I guess. I am going on running. So am I, Almanzo said. If they don't warm up pretty soon, we better stop and rub them with snow. Let's follow the swell west a ways. If we don't find anything that way, we could circle back further south. Suits me, Cap agreed. Their good horses went willingly into a trot again, and they ran beside the sleds. The upland ended sooner than they expected. The snow field sloped downward and spread into a hollow that the upland had hidden. It looked like a slough. Almanzo pulled Prince to a walk and got into the sled to look the land over. The flat hollow ran towards the west. He saw no way to get around it without turning back along the upland. Then he saw ahead across the slough a smear of gray-brown in the snow blowing from a drift. He stopped Prince and yelled, Hey, Cap! That looks like smoke over there. Cap was looking at it. Looks like it comes out of that snowbank, he shouted. Almanzo drove on down the slope. After a few minutes, he called back, It's smoke, all right. There's some kind of house down there. They had to cross the slough to reach it. In their hurry, Cap drove alongside Almanzo and the buckskin went down. This was the deepest hole they had to get out of yet. But they did. Shadows were beginning to creep eastward before they got onto the solid footing and began cautiously to go on. The thin smoke did rise from a low snowbank, and there was not a track on the snow. But when they circled and came back to the western side, they saw that the snow had been shoveled away from before a door in the snowbank. They pulled up their sleds and they shouted. The door opened and a man stood there, astonished. His hair was long and his unshaven beard grew up to his cheekbones. Hello, he said. Hello, come on in. Come in. Where did you come from? Where are you going? Come on in. How long can you stay? He was so excited he didn't wait for any answers. We've got to take care of our horses first, Almanzo answered. The man snatched a coat and came out saying, Come along, right over this way, follow me. Where'd you fellows come from? We just drove from town, Cap said. The man led the way to a door in another snowbank. They told him their names while they unhitched, and he said his name was Anderson. They led the horses into a warm sod stable. Now, do you remember what sod is? That's where they cut the grass with the roots in the dirt into long slabs, so they stack those one on top of the other, and that's sod, and they build a nice warm building with that. The end of the stable was partitioned off with poles and a rough door, and grains of wheat had trickled through the crack. Almanzo and Cap looked at it, and they grinned at each other. Well, that's where I'm going to stop. Because like I said, it's a very long chapter. So they finally found the man with the wheat. And now we'll see what happens next. It's Maria from Still Dreaming Homestead. I want to pray blessings on you and yours, in your house, out of your house, in the day and the night. Whatever you do, keep dreaming. And like Cap and Almanzo, don't give up. Good night, and God bless you.